Tamar was crouched behind Gale, smiling.
Aren't you supposed to be the amazing one, Gale? You don't seem that special to me.
How did he sneak up undetected? Gale was never caught off guard. Tamar's voice was cocky.
The Thickle is a dangerous place. If you're going to be so careless, you shouldn't come.
Congratulations. You managed to catch me off guard. Brag while you can. It will never happen again.
They moved through the jungle gradually. Neither one would allow the other to take the lead. The distance between them reflected their discomfort with each other. The silence went on and on. It made the day drag on and slowed their pace, which frustrated both of them. Near the end of the day, they stopped at the edge of a ravine carved out by a meandering river. It was a common place for wardens to stop. There was a waterfall to fill canteens, and a log lay over the ravine, making it an easy place to cross. After filling their canteens, they ate dinner over by the bridge. Tamar was perched cross-legged on a huge mushroom, cradling a slab of jerky, tearing pieces off with his teeth. His face was dark, as always. His other hand gripped the handle of his unweaver, a broad knife that hooked forward at the end like a fang. Every warden carried one. It was a tool for cutting through the thickle. Gale's unweaver was resting in a sheath at his side. Every story he ever heard about Tamar's treachery was fresh in his mind. During the day's walk, Gale had worked out the details of a plan. He dreaded telling Tamar about it, but it had to be done. Grudgingly, he forced himself to break the silence.
We should head north.
Have you even read the reports on Shinnor?
Of course we need to.
The wardens tracked Shinnor southwest to the tip of Fallow Bay, which means Shinnor is going to the other side of the bay, not to the north.
Gale shrugged off Tamar's interruption. He could ignore Tamar's arrogance for the sake of accomplishing this goal. Gale leaned forward and looked Tamar in the eye.
And those wardens lost him because they failed to keep up with Shinnor. We will too, if we follow him the same way they did. We need to intercept him. He'll head north once he passes the bay. A dominant Crayor like Shinnor has his choice of hunting grounds. Everyone knows Crayors prefer open valleys where they can use their speed to run down prey. The valleys on the other side of the bay are 60 miles away from Vindari. Why would Shinnor travel that far for a meal? The valleys to the north are only 15 miles from Vindari. That's why he comes to Vindari so often. When he can't find prey at home, he goes to the next closest valley.
Tamar covered his face with his hand, his thumb and middle finger massaging at his temples. When his hand fell away, his eyes carried a condescending expression, as did his words.
Even though this quest is difficult, the elders know it won't be a challenge for me. They must have sent you with me as a handicap.
Gale's face went red. His jaw clenched. Tamar was picking a fight. If that happened, working together would become impossible. With a deep breath, Gale put the insult aside.
Tell me, Gale, if you did manage to find the legendary Shinnor, what would you do? How would you bring him down?
Gale reached back and pulled a small vial out of his backpack. It was sealed with a cork. Inside the vial was a thick yellow fluid. He held it up and smiled proudly.
Poison? You idiot. If poison worked on Shinnor, he would hardly be a legend. Shinnor has survived in the thickle for decades. Obviously, the wardens have tried to poison him before. He's immune.
This is no common poison from a thorn, snake, or spider. It comes from a rare creature in the northern thickle. It's not quite a fish, not quite a squid, but something in between. This funny little thing is the most venomous creature known to man. Nothing is immune to its poison.
Tamar shook his head.
It won't work. Killing Shinnor will require something more.
He held up an exploding tip. With a sudden swing of his arm, the tip spun through the air and sank into a tree beside them. For half a second, it did nothing. Just as Gale was starting to think it might be a dud, a loud pop made him jump. Bark was peeled back around a singed scar.
I've heard of those tips. They're very handy until they go off in your face,
Gale said.
If you are that careless, you shouldn't even be a warden. Listen to me. We are heading south. I'm older than you. Just follow my lead and everything will turn out fine.
You may be older, but you're not better.
Oh, really? Is that why I beat you in every archery tournament? Or why it was so easy for me to sneak up on you back at the cliffs?
That was the last straw. Fists clenched, Gale stared into Tamar's eyes.
If you are so much better than me, why am I the apprentice of the Minister of Lore, and you're merely the apprentice of a common warden?
This time, it was Tamar's jaw that clenched. His head came forward until he was staring out the top of his eyes.
My father is anything but common. At least I know who my father is.
It hurt worse than any other insult Tamar could have uttered, for it was the truth which had been thrown in Gale's face many times over the years. He couldn't respond. He couldn't even move. It took all his effort not to explode. Something dripped from his knuckles. It was blood. His fists were clenched so tight that an untribbed nail of his pointer finger had pierced his palm. Tamar smiled.
Are you going to cry? If you're better than me, let's see you do this.
In one quick motion, Tamar lifted his bow, drew an arrow, and let loose. For a few seconds, Gale just stared at the arrow embedded in the tree beside them. It had taken a robin out of the air. Gale started to reach for one of his arrows, but stopped. He couldn't possibly do that. Subotai couldn't even do that.
Your aim is a little better than mine. So what, you can't even draw my bow?
Gale tossed his bow to Tamar. Tamar snatched it out of the air and examined it. The slender bow was longer than most longbows. It was carved out of one solid piece of bone. Tamar grabbed the bowstring and tried to draw it, but it wouldn't budge. He examined the bow again, trying to decipher whether this was some sort of trick. Tamar grabbed the string of the bow again and pulled back with all his strength until he was red in the face, but he couldn't move the string more than an inch. Gale could draw it easily. Gale smiled at Tamar, but the joy of that small victory quickly wilted. Tamar was smiling wide in a creepy way.
So what?
He whispered. A shiver ran up Gale's spine as Tamar came to his feet. He dropped Gale's bow, then walked out onto the log that bridged the ravine. Curious, Gale followed him. Halfway across the log, he spun around to face Gale, who was still standing at the edge of the bridge. Tamar's voice was oddly calm.
The true test of a warden is neither skill nor strength. It's the courage to risk your life. But you don't know anything about that now, do you? You don't even carry exploding tips because you're afraid you might hurt yourself.
I've fought off wolves with my bare hands. I've even stood my ground against a charging Nai.
Nais were built like bears, but much bigger, with the look and grace of a cat.
You are lying.
I am not.
Then come. If you are so strong and brave, step out here and we will see who's better.
Gale glanced into the ravine. The sheer rock walls disappeared into the mist, drifting out from the base of the waterfall. A fall from this height would be fatal.
That's not a good idea.
Are you afraid? I thought you had faced down a Nai. Haven't you fought wolves with your bare hands?
Gale walked out onto the log.
I'm not afraid of anything, especially not you.
Tamar smiled at Gale's pride.
That is the one thing we have in common. We both have pride, hence we both strive to be the best. That is why we place higher in the tournaments than everyone else our age, and why we were sent on such a difficult quest. Only by being the best can we prove that we are better than everyone else. It is our single-minded purpose, the only thing that really matters. So come, let us see who is the very best, and who has lived a meaningless life.
That's not why I...
Tamar rushed in with his fist cocked back for a vicious hook. It slammed into Gale's cheekbone and stopped dead. Gale didn't flinch. Tamar lurched back, grasping his aching hand. The shock in Tamar's eyes was replaced by determination. He came right back in, jabbing and aiming for Gale's nose. Gale tossed his head from side to side, dodging. Tamar picked up the pace, pumping with both fists as fast as he could muster. Gale brought his hand up to alternate blocks with his dodges. Gale backed up, cocking his other hand back for a hook. Tamar watched it closely, ready to duck. That's why he didn't notice Gale suddenly throw his head forward into Tamar's face. Tamar stumbled back, landing on his ass, throwing his arms out to grasp the log so he wouldn't fall. Tamar ran a hand across his lips. It was covered in blood. He was bleeding from his nose and mouth. Gale smiled. Tamar was losing, badly. Chest heaving, Tamar scrambled to his feet, yanked out 2 exploding tips, and hurled them at Gale. As always, Tamar's aim was flawless. A single hit would prove fatal. Without a moment to think, Gale dodged, throwing himself off the log. Tamar leaned over the edge and stared down into the mist. No one could survive a fall like that. A bit of guilt touched his face. Tamar sighed. Part of being a warrior was killing, and accepting the fact that you would probably be killed one day. Something struck Tamar from behind, throwing him off the log. Tamar screamed. Stretched out below him was nothing but empty air and the thick mist that concealed his fate. The fall was cut short. The collar of his leather shirt dug into his throat. Gale stood up on the log, dangling Tamar by the back of his shirt. Tamar grabbed the log above him. As he climbed up, he noticed how many vines were hanging down from the log. Gale had grabbed one as he fell, then climbed up on the other side of the log. Gale walked towards the northern side of the ravine.
We will head north. Our destination isn't far from here. We should be able to reach it by...
Shut up. I'm not following you. I'm going after Shinor. If you follow me, I'll put an arrow in you.
Tamar stormed off the log to the southern bank of the ravine, then pushed into the thicket. With no other options, Gale headed north.